Okay, hi. So, like, this video is really late out, and there's a decent enough reason for that, I guess. Around October time last year, my old laptop really started to struggle, like not being able to import stuff into Vegas without freezing, and then if I did somehow manage to get stuff into the timeline, it would stutter so bad that editing anything basically became impossible, to the degree that I like to edit stuff now. So that was a real massive bummer. I'd gone most of the year without sort of the motivation to get a video out, and then when I finally did get the motivation to do it and had a full Halloween video, like edited, recorded, ready to go in terms of audio and gameplay, I just couldn't get the actual video out. And then I had plans for another Scooby-Doo video around December, and then obviously I would want this video out before the end of the year, and obviously that didn't happen. So that's why this video is coming out now as opposed to the end of last year. But with that out of the way, let's just dive straight in. This is everything that I played last year. Much like 2022's video, we're starting off with Pokemon. Despite Generation 5 being my favourite and the Gen 1 remakes being my first, I actually think I have more sentimental attachment to Gen 4. I wasn't too much into Emerald as a child because, quite frankly, I couldn't beat it, which is entirely my own fault because through the entire game, I'd only leveled up my Blaziken and everything else was around level 30, so by the time I got to the Elite Four, I got stonewalled by the likes of Walrein. This meant, though, that Gen 4 served as a nice refresher for me and managed to get me reinvested again after I found myself being frustrated because of my own shortcomings at Gen 3. I still remember me and a friend going to see the Simpsons movie in cinemas and then being bought Diamond on the same day so we could play it together as he already owned it. It was a very nice day. All that said, I wasn't particularly popping off at the remakes upon their reveal because they were entirely expected, and the double hit of Moon and Shield being less than my favourites had me feeling disillusioned with the series to a similar degree to how I was after not being able to beat Emerald. To my utter surprise though, this remake of Diamond has done a similar job as to what the original did, as I found myself really enjoying this revisit to Sinnoh. I think it was because of how linear the newer games are, but being given the opportunity to explore a region and partake in side content like the contests, underground and puffin making really felt like a breath of fresh air compared to what we've had more recently. The difficulty was an actual surprise too, and while the way the experience share now works meant I was never consistently struggling, I found myself relishing gym battles, the Elite Four, and particularly Cynthia, thanks to them all being buffed to have competitive movesets, items, and abilities. I also found the things like the shift in art direction far less jarring than other people did, and thought that in motion it actually does look pretty okay. I also promised myself I'd try and stay away from most of the mons you'd typically find on a Sinnoh team, only allowing myself to use Luxray. My team actually ended up far different from my original squad, which was comprised of an Empoleon, B-Barrel, Floatzel, Staraptor, Luxray, and Dialga, because, you know, I was a child. This time round I went for the mentality of, yeah, I am gonna try that Drapion I always wanted, and yeah, Hippowdon is a big useful gal, I'll get myself one. This time was my final squad, and I found myself super attached to my Drifblim because he carried me really hard through the mid-game. Hippowdon ensured we'd clutch out the Cynthia fight, and my beloved Drapion, who came all the way from being a Skorupi who always died, being the reason that Milotic and Garchomp were actually manageable thanks to having knockoff at the ready. Honestly, after how I found myself feeling about the series' direction after Sword and Shield, Brilliant Diamond acted as a bit of a breath of fresh air that reminded me why I was so into these games as a kid. I'm hoping that Legends Arceus, when I do eventually get round to that, will do some more work to restore my faith in the series. On the flip side, something that hit me miles differently from other entries in its series that I played previously was Metroid Dread. I outlined, I feel quite clearly, in my Night of 100 Frights video that Metroid and me don't typically get along too well due to its non-linear nature. This meant that, as I was playing Dread, I was completely shocked by the fact that I found myself actually adoring its non-linear aspects. I think that what the series excels in and goes for with every entry finally clicked clicked with me here, and I saw the game less as a confusing mess and more as an adventure. I love the fact that, unlike Fusion, which I also quite like, that the game only gave me a general idea of where to go, but didn't outright tell me where I needed to be outside of a few sections. Hell, I enjoyed exploring so much that I ended up 100%ing the game, something I've never even thought about doing in any other Metroidvania. While going for 100% and exploring generally, I found myself loving how the game uses all of Samus's upgrades, some new and some old, to create puzzles in the areas which you have to solve or return to with the correct equipment. Unlocking the upgrades from the Emmys and the boss fights was great too, and each encounter with both types of foe was a real treat. I love how challenging the bosses were to fight, and I loved how they rewarded you for landing counters and using Samus's abilities to evade and overcome them. On the other side, I loved hiding from the Emmys and how tense all that felt. Using my abilities to try and avoid or escape was incredibly tense, and that made it all the more satisfying when I did get the means to take them down. What I loved more though was the fact that these encounters actually act as pseudo-puzzles within themselves, forcing you to evade the Emmy one last time before finding the perfect spot to take them down. It's no wonder why this game was given so much praise from critics, longtime fans and newcomers. It encapsulates perfectly everything I think of when Metroid is brought up, and delivers a visceral, explorative and incredibly enjoyable time that I came away from wondering how soon I'd be back to it. Dread has fully cemented to me that I'm over my irrational avoidance of Metroidvanias, and makes me want to explore its home series, and the genre as a whole. And while we're on the topic of me breaking some of my #gaming habits, let's talk about Deathloop. With Arcane's previous projects, the Dishonored series specifically, I had a lovely little tradition of saying I'll play them because it looks really cool, and then never doing so. Deathloop was looking like it was going to be very much the same, but I decided enough was enough and asked for the game for Crimbo. Deathloop took a little while to get going for me. Playing out your first loop is a tutorial to show you how stuff works, but as soon as you get past this tutorial area, the game opens up considerably, giving you just enough information to give you an indication of what to do, while allowing you to decide which objectives and powers to seek out first based on how you want to play. I like how the game organises its objectives into ones that will net you new powers, some that will net you new weapons, and others that will give you a better idea of where and how each of your targets operates and can ultimately be killed. I really liked exploring each of the 4 areas you're given, and discovering the ideal routes and methods I would end up using to take down each of my targets was great. Initially, I found myself accidentally going in guns blazing, with the game actively discouraging you to do so, despite the fact that it can work if you really do want it to. As my time with the game went on, however, I gathered more powers, infused more weapons and perks for both me and my equipment to make sure they stayed with me after each loop. And as time went on, I found I was able to better play the way I'd wanted to from the start, beginning to nail down which routes and abilities worked best for my playstyle and each target. In the end, I was favouring the stealthier playstyle I'd sought from the start, making use of the shift slab for quiet movement and the aether slab to slip by my foes unseen, so I could hack devices to either secure my entry or turn against my enemies. I found it really fun to plan my route for a full day, having to choose between getting stronger or progressing different story routes, which culminated in me finding a way to kill one of the visionaries, sometimes multiple going down at once. I found myself as well, as the game went on, trying to piece together mentally what my final route would be, since you can only visit one area during each of the times of day. I was making this route in my head, visualizing which perks and powers and weapons I'd bring to each part of this route, and found the planning of my final big loop really fun to try and piece together mentally in the build up to it. This, unfortunately, led to one of my biggest disappointments with the game, as after all that time I'd spent figuring out myself what would potentially be the optimal route to kill all my targets in one loop, which abilities to bring and which weapons to grab, the game, after reaching a certain point in the story, just plans it all out for you, telling you that this is the only way to solve the puzzle of killing all 8 of your targets in one loop, and that was a massive letdown for me, because I thought I was being a little smart guy, you know, but instead The game just gave me the answer. Ultimately though, I quite enjoyed the game. It's a cool concept executed well and gives the player some good freedom to play their own way. I think there's definitely room for me, next time I do come back to this, to try things in a different order, as I didn't do a couple of the optional side quests because I much preferred getting new slabs instead, and I never actually touched the multiplayer when you invade other people's games. Maybe I'll give that a go next time I look back to playing this, but from what I played, I was really quite content. Oh boy, it's time for more Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh, as I alluded to in my 2020 video, has been a lifelong thing for me. Not a constant, consistent thing, but certainly something I always come back to after a period of time. The break between my last two run-ins with the series though has been shortened considerably compared to other times I've gone back to it, thanks to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, the latest video game for the series which released in January. I hadn't heard too terribly much about it, but when I saw folks conversing about it on my timeline, I was certainly intrigued to have a look at it, especially when the promise of 50 free packs for PS Plus owners was presented to me. I ripped through the packs, which were only 2 cards each and wasn't quite ready to go online since I had no deck, so I checked out the single player mode. Going in I was expecting your typical either original story or run-of-the-mill retelling of certain parts of the anime, but what I actually got was something far different. The single player mode, instead of retreading familiar ground for the series, takes you through a series of duels with different archetypes, teaching you how to use them, the story behind them, and eventually giving you the building blocks to construct your own deck with each one of them after you finish its particular story. This is a great idea for a single player campaign in a Yu-Gi-Oh game, giving players old and new the chance to experience builds and cards they may not have even heard of or given a second glance in other games or in real life if they play. Of course the game has other means of getting your grubby gamer mitts on some fresh cards, also featuring an in-game shop. Here you can buy little mates to accompany you in duels, different visuals for your field and graveyard, and of course packs of cards. I really appreciate the game giving you this much customization of not only your deck, but your entire field. Also, unlike other games of the series, the way you unlock new packs is actually pretty interesting. Instead of just unlocking new packs as you play, you obtain keys to, quote, secret packs through getting cards that belong to certain archetypes or feature in different packs from the base few the game gives you access to from the get-go. This is a really neat way of unlocking packs, and I legitimately sunk a whole night into grinding in-game currency, which the game does hand out quite liberally through missions, dueling, etc., and then just open pack after pack, chaining into other packs and then opening them over and over and over until I had what I wanted, namely my Dark Worlds and Cyber Dragons. This game is frighteningly good at replicating the high opening packs in real life used to give me, and that's really quite something to me personally. So not only does it have a slick and original single player campaign, a nice level of customization for the playing field, a neat and rewarding pack system, gives out the points you use to buy these packs liberally enough, but it also has a comprehensive deck building system which lets you craft individual cards of chosen rarities should you have the resources to do so, which you can earn also from dismantling the stuff you don't need. I'm gonna be honest here, this might be the best Yu-Gi-Oh game ever. As while I love Tag Force 2, Legacy of the Duelist and Spirit Caller, the fresh stuff this game brings to the table, alongside some really nice presentation, may just put it over the top of every other game for me. It does a wonderful job of capturing the spirit of not just the card game, but the competitive nature of it as a whole, and replicates every aspect from deck building to pack opening really well. Time will tell if that opinion holds up with it being the best, but from what I've played, I really appreciated what it did.
Babe, open up, babe!
Oddworld is a series I'd consider myself to be a very passive fan of, tending to admire it from afar, though I have been exposed to it enough over the years through the likes of Hellfire Com's playthrough of the original over a decade ago, a couple years later from Metro Excel's Munch's Odyssey Let's Play, and in more recent years the works of Kid Icarus has really highlighted how neat of a series it is. Have I experienced any of these quirky little fellows for myself though? No, I own the original, but I could barely get past Rupture Farms because it was too confusing for my baby brain, and I've owned Munch's Odyssey on Xbox for like 3 years, but haven't popped it in yet. Maybe at some point I will. However, when it comes to the more recent Oddworld titles, I've actually been able to dip my toes in a bit more easily. I own and have beaten New and Tasty and really enjoyed how it updates and makes the original a bit more accessible for gamers like me, who are stupid. That was like 7 years ago. Oh god, I was gonna say 4. Where's the time gone? And more recently, thanks to PS Plus having it for free, I was able to play their heavily anticipated Oddworld Soulstorm, which has been in development since 2015. Every time that it was shown off at the likes of E3 or State of Play, I would be happy to see it, but quickly became a little concerned that the game's new direction, with the additions of crafting, destructible environments and seemingly combat, were building to an experience far different from what I'd come to really enjoy in New and Tasty. Having played and beaten the game now, however, I needn't have worried, as all of this fits quite well into the game's new structure. This game isn't the remake it was envisioned to be originally. It's a ground-up reimagining / retelling which uses quite a chunk of the original story but remixes certain beats to create a different version of that same tale, complete with a totally different ending which looks to be leading in a direction different to the original. At its core though, this game is very much still an Oddworld game. All your faves are here, like possession, stealth, speaking with the Medokans to get them moving, and ultimately saving them by exploring the environment to find secret areas and solve puzzles. The game has much less of an emphasis on the puzzles this time, with none of them being terribly taxing, but the explorative and platforming aspects of the game are still front and centre, and I think this is because the game is also leaning more heavily than ever into its cinematic aspect, and as such doesn't want you to get stuck on a puzzle and give up because it really wants you to experience this chapter of Abe's journey. This isn't to say things are too easy though. Abe is still frail as hell, enemies now actively search for you and can even look up and down to find you, and if you're anything like me, it'll take you a couple of goes to complete certain sections when you need to save Medokans, as they're even more frail than you. As always, you've got your possession to help you out, which is still extremely satisfying, with you now navigating it to the enemy you want to possess and being able to unload on enemies once you possess them. New to this game, however, you've got your items and crafting menu which can help make environments safer to traverse, set up traps for sligs and take them out temporarily or permanently, with things like ensnaring them or outright killing them. This adds an extra dimension to the Oddworld formula, with you having options outside of basic stealth or possession, and while I was initially worried about this idea from the trailers, I think it fits in incredibly well in practice. There's only one thing that this system introduces that I'm not a fan of. These sections where you have to defend thousands of Medokans in the background of the stage from enemies who'll mercilessly slaughter them by using your items and arming followers that you have with you at a time to help you out. They're not terrible. Okay, maybe they are, but to say I wasn't a fan of them is an understatement, and I really don't get why in this cinematic puzzle platformer that I have to essentially play a tower defense game. My only other real complaint is that the penultimate level has some really weird glitches, like enemies walking through walls and Medokans getting stuck in there as well. Really soured that level for me. Generally though, I found most of the levels to be really enjoyable, with levels like the Hijack, all the Necrom levels and Fico Depot being really fun. I was initially worried that I wouldn't enjoy this game because of what was new, but now that I've beaten it, I can safely say it's probably my favourite Oddworld game. Something I didn't feel quite so strongly about before playing it, however, kickstarts our games for March, with Team Sonic Racing being an entry in the series that I perpetually forgot existed until I got it free in March on PS Plus. As I'm sure you already know if you subscribe to this channel, I have a rather embarrassing amount to say about the Blue Blur, so the fact that I forgot this game even was a thing should really speak for itself regarding my thoughts going into it, which is actually quite a shame because the series has quite a decent track record with racing games, with both the first Riders game and the All-Stars racing titles being great. What is nice though is that, while not quite on par with those titles, is that I did, in the end, have a decent amount of fun with the story mode of TSR, going as far as to basically 100% it, but that being enough to fill me up on the game, with me having little to no desire to play it further or delve into the multiplayer. The game controls about as well as the other races Sumo produced previously, with drifting feeling solid and wisps finally coming full circle and acting as items you use while racing. Genuinely, this feels like their natural conclusion, and I like how a good amount of them function. Now please, let's leave them here, yeah? The tracks themselves are also varied nicely, with most being based explicitly on levels from throughout the series, with a couple of them being reused from the All-Stars games and one or two completely original tropes being added in. Much like the All-Stars games, the story mode is comprised of races and alternative challenges to help you earn stars to move forward. I like a lot of the alternative tasks which actively ask you to get good at the game, and I like picking different characters for different types of level. Typically I'd stick with Silver for the most part since he's a technical character, meaning he's good at drifting, but I just couldn't help myself from playing as Omega for levels where I had to destroy the egg pawns. Musical remixes accompany many of the levels as well, with Cool Edge, Sandopolis and Final Egg popping me the most when I first heard them, partly because I just wasn't expecting them to be here. What makes the game stand out the most compared to its contemporaries though is something that's present within its very title, that being the whole team aspect of the game. Unlike other races which happen to feature team modes or just have the word in the title, this game embeds the team aspect directly into its core gameplay, with you being able to offer excess items to teammates, driving near spun out teammates, helping them to recover quickly, and whoever is first out of the 3 teammates leaving a trail behind which the others can follow to gain boost and overtake the opposing team. Doing these will fill your team ultimate meter, which can be activated to give every member of the team a huge boost of speed and make them invincible temporarily, all the while a remix of the racer who activated the ability's theme begins blasting. The choices for these themes are all pretty expected, but that didn't mean hearing I'm a Spy from SA2 for Rouge, This Machine for Omega and Team Chaos for Vector, as well as Dreams of an Absolution for Silver didn't make me grin, though I wasn't too sold on Reach for the Stars being Sonic's. I don't get why that was chosen. There's also a pretty simple story here too. It's nothing to write home about. Some of the dialogue between the characters was nice though, and in honesty the game feels more like Amy and Silver were the main characters over everyone else, with them doing most of the heavy lifting to move things forward. All in all, the game does have its charm, and I did enjoy how the team aspect had me playing a little differently to other races. Is this my go-to racer now though? Nah man, I'm a CTR boy for life now. Did I have fun with TSR though? Yeah, but that's about it. All the while I was playing TSR, I was dealing with a horrendous stomach bug which forced me to take time off work for the first time in a very long time. However, knowing I was feeling rather glum with that circumstance, my lovely partner sent me a little surprise in the post. Together we played through and really liked the first Dying Light, running through the game multiple times together and completing all of the side content too. We both said we'd like to play through the second game, presumably together, but instead she sent it to me while I was ill and insisted I go through it to get a feel for it first. Initially, I found it a little tricky to get myself into Dying Light 2. I was used to flinging around, slapping zombies and making quick getaways in the first game, but here, my initial movement options were really stripped back in comparison, with stuff like wall climbing and hanging onto stuff being incredibly limited and my sprint lasting an incredibly short length of time. This is mainly because the game places much greater emphasis on the skill tree and exploration aspect, encouraging you to engage with the side content it has to offer, dive deep into infected hives and climb the highest heights in the world to grow your character through experience, with these inhibitor things you collect also giving you the option to either increase your health or stamina once you've collected 3 of them, and each time you level one of these stats up, different skills in the ability trees then become available. This limited start though meant that I really felt the growth of my character this time around, appreciating the small increments my stamina went up and ensuring I made the most of the new abilities I unlocked as I got them. This meant that by the end of the game, I was pulling off stuff far smoother than in the first game, especially with the additions of the parachute and the grappling hook from the first game being integrated this time into the core moveset by game's end, not just optional goodies. These upgrades made traversal incredibly satisfying, but that's only one part of the game, with the combat also receiving a bit of a bump too. Quick dodges, parries, and rewards for pulling these off spice up the combat from the first game, and while I still would prefer to be hopping and bopping anytime I'm in one of the game's mandatory combat areas, there is something incredibly satisfying about watching in slow motion as I carve up a cretin. There's also these weapon mods you can equip, but I never really bothered honestly. I don't usually with things like that. The only way in which I think the game falls down is its story. It wasn't exactly the strong suit of the first game, but it was fine enough, and here would be a very similar scenario, but it feels like the first 4 to 5 hours of the game are super inconsequential by the time you hit the game's actual main hub. They set up characters, relationships and stuff, and then forget about them to establish completely new ones when you enter the main hub world. I don't know, it just struck me as really odd, and I found myself feeling that in this aspect, the game was missing something which the first one had, though I think I'm probably going to chalk that up to the fact that I didn't have someone playing this entire game with me. The only real negative I had experienced with the game besides this was this weird glitch that persisted throughout the entire adventure, where if say I had to initiate a mission after clearing out a room full of zombies, the game wouldn't acknowledge the fact that the room had been cleared, so I'd have to go back to the main menu and reload it in order to get the mission to actually start working. That one technical flub aside though, if the gameplay is going to feel as good as this one does by game's end, then I'm fine with accepting its weird, lacking and slightly disconnected story if it means that I'm going to experience gameplay this smooth. All of that brings us into May time, which actually ended up being a month of discovery for me, where I found my previous conceptions of certain games I thought I already knew a lot about, despite never really playing them, being challenged quite a bit. The first of these two was the original God of War. I, for some reason, had the desire to play the 2018 reboot, which I own through the PS Plus collection on PS5, but I wanted to fully understand the series as a whole first before I dove in. I played the third one before and knew the general structure of the story. Man is angry at the gods, kills them all, dies, raises a son in different country, and pisses off more gods. Tale as old as time. What I found out when trying this one out though was that this story isn't quite as simple as it may seem. Yes, it's a story of a man's revenge against a god. Yes, he brutally murders everyone who stands in his way, but like, there's platforming and puzzles, and the combat, despite seeming like it would get repetitive, has enough spice to keep itself engaging. I was horrified that I was going to burn out on this one really hard, but like, honestly, I grew to really love it. I loved learning slowly more and more about Kratos as the game wore on, keeping me invested in what outwardly is typically seen as a rather simple story, with the depth culminating well within gameplay, albeit in a section I wasn't very fond of. The variety it exudes in its combat and levels kept me engaged the whole way through. Mixing up my combos and weapons before finishing with a huge hit on magic attack was insanely satisfying. Boss fights involving minor puzzles and enemies being super satisfying to take down with my arsenal and their unique quick time events was a real treat as well. The game also, I think, is actually the perfect length for the type of gameplay it brings, and the level structure and design is excellent because it means that each level stands out on its own due to its structure and variety without overstaying its welcome. The game's only around 8 hours, but that's all I needed. It came, did its job incredibly well, and left, leaving ample room for the sequels we all know followed, and leaving the player hungry enough because of its enjoyable gameplay to want more, despite, from the outside, the game seeming a bit plain and repetitive. This is a game, I think, that needs to be played to be fully appreciated, and appreciate it I really did. A game I didn't appreciate as much the first time I played it though was Fortnite. It was originally on the cards to be featured in my 2020 year in review video, but given that I played 2 games and then uninstalled because I simply didn't like it, I didn't think I had the knowledge to dunk on a game I'd played for maybe like half an hour and then given up on. It just didn't feel right to put it in that video. Things changed this year though, with the zero build mode being introduced to spice up the game, and hearing my friends have such a fun time with it, it convinced me to give the game another shot. Straight out of the gate I can say, yeah, I did have fun. I enjoyed all the different weird mechanics that it has compared to the like of Warzone, and the animals, the fishes, the chug being way funnier than armor. I tried the game during the Halo crossover, meaning railguns were still knocking about, and Christ, I loved them. I think the crossover stuff and the zany wacky stuff you just find lying around the map is what appealed to me massively here, and working alongside my friends was a huge plus for me as well. One time a friend of mine got trigger happy and in a tank, and we chased someone through a house, but we shot out the floor, so our tank just got stuck in the basement, and we all just sat there and laughed. It didn't help us win the game, but it was funny, it was a memory, and that's what I like. You don't get moments like that in realistic battle royale games. I had a lot of positive memories with Warzone when I played it, but nothing as laugh out loud as that in just a few games. So yeah, I can say I'm glad I went back and gave this one another go. Who knew all they had to do was remove the core gimmick of the game for it to be more enjoyable for me? That being said, I haven't found myself revisiting the game terribly often since those initial couple of weeks I played it, but for those 3 weeks or so, I had quite a bit of fun. Uh-oh, it's the June alarm! It's halfway through the year and I've not played that much! But actually, I'm not really that arsed. At this time last year, I found myself feeling concerned that I hadn't played many new games, but this year, when a similar feeling crept in, I found myself not feeling as bothered. I'd laid myself a list of games that I wanted to get my hands on and found myself wanting to take my time with them more so I can appreciate the games that I was playing more, as opposed to just rushing through them to say, look, another one for the list. As I'm getting older, I'm taking games slower, I'm finding, and that's completely okay. I had to remind myself of the fact that that was okay, but it is. I'm enjoying them more as I'm going through them because I'm playing more of them, experiencing more of what they have to offer. So while, compared to the last 2 years, I have played fewer games at this point, I'm finding myself appreciating the ones I am playing more because of the fact that I'm taking my time with them. So yeah, I don't know. Here's Hitman 3. Back in 2020, if you recall, I was completely blown away by Hitman 2, and it still shocks me to this day that I don't hear it being talked about more often. It's a game unlike any other I'd ever played, combining top-notch stealth gameplay with incredibly open levels, each sporting a different theme and allowing the player to determine just how they'll secure the kills on their targets within these massive worlds, whether through one of the many different story missions that reveal themselves for each target, allowing you to kill them in a unique way, or just shooting them and making a quick getaway. The sheer fun I had with that game pretty much guaranteed that at some point I was going to grab Hitman 3, and when I spied it in games reduced section from £45 to £16, I struck while the iron was hot. Hitman 3 kicks off right where Hitman 2 leaves off, both mechanically and narratively, meaning I was able to slip right back into the swing of things from the outset. There's very little difference in terms of mechanics from 2, aside from this camera gadget you have which now allows you to open shutters, vents and windows should you scan them. This also gets some use as an extraneous objective in certain levels too, with you scanning information about the different levels. This isn't to say that Hitman 3 is more of the same though, as instead of mixing up its mechanics, the game instead opts to give each level a different set piece or unique gimmick, from solving a murder mystery to making a last minute to escape, to being unsure who your targets actually are and having to locate and kill 5 mercenaries before they kill you in a crowded nightclub. Each level has such a different, unique feel, and this makes each of them insanely satisfying to complete. Yeah, in order to achieve certain set pieces the game wants you to go after, it means that you're railroaded a little bit into choosing a certain way to kill your target. But with the infinitely replayable nature of the game, you can always go back and see how things play out when you choose to eliminate the posh cretins you're after in a completely different way, meaning that the game's gameplay isn't fully compromised for the sake of the story the game wants to conclude. Between this and the second game, whose levels that can be accessed in the game should you buy the DLC or have the save data, I really don't think you can go wrong, as while this game is a little bit less open than its predecessor and a tiny bit shorter, it's just as fun to play. And fun is also the name of the game in this next one too. As someone who takes great pride in playing Smashy Bros as seriously as possible with my new main, a flying magic boy with big shoes, I'm still not over the fact that he's here. Look at him, he's in the game! Nick Allstars appealed to me from the outset, but I wasn't much fussed with it after I heard pretty much nothing about it post-launch. Thankfully, PS Plus once again came through and I got to give the game a go without properly committing to the purchase. I played the game post-voice acting patch and honestly, I can't imagine how the game felt without it. Even with the same gameplay, the voices help to provide the air of zaniness that should be flowing through these characters and the game as a whole, and I'm quite thankful that I've experienced the game in its current state. And what a state it is. I mean that in the best possible way, of course. In Smashy Bros, I'm playing neutral, looking for ways to start my combos, loops, and confirms, trying to read my opponent and react to them to achieve victory, edge guard, ledge trap, all that stuff. Here, I'm running at people with my giant green dinosaur and mashing. and I wouldn't have it any other way. I love the way the characters feel here, so fast and loose, it's super fitting, and while the game is also a fair shade mashier than other platform fighters, I found myself not minding because of the insanity of just running in and somehow landing my weird combos anyway. Like, why would I try and play neutral when I could just do dash attack, jab, down smash at Reptar and spike you and love my life? Who has the time for combo trees and character specific tech when I can simply land nair, up air, up B and kill you at 50 with Shredder? My thoughts on this game aren't that deep because it's not that deep, and I'm just simply having mindless fun every time I boot it up, slapping buttons with some of my childhood faves, and while it's still missing some key characters like Timmy and Jimmy, I am hoping the game continues to add wacky and fun characters as it goes on. I wrote this script back in June when I first played the game, and this has not aged well at all, by the way. Speaking of wacky and fun characters, maybe we could try this again, Cartoon Network? Maybe make it good this time? Moving swiftly on from repeated attempts to make a good Cartoon Network platform fighter, for the last game I played in June, we're looking at the very first time Nintendo's Little Pink Man went fully 3D. Forgotten Land isn't my first foray into Kirby as a series, having played both Return to Dreamland and Epic Yarn back on the Wii. I've always thought I should try and get more into the series. I played Kirby in Brawl, he was my main, and I always saw the likes of Triple Deluxe and Planet Robobot always sat there tempting me, but I never quite got round to making the jump. After seeing how well this game was doing though, and it piquing my interest incredibly early on by essentially hoisting the gameplay of Mario 3D World, which even from when I very first saw this game in motion, thought fit a 3D Kirby far better than it ever did a 3D Mario. Even from the first moments on the beach, it's incredibly clear just how well Kirby fits into this style of level design and gameplay. When I say this game controls smoother than butter, I mean as smooth as Le Pack. It is nuts how responsive Kirby is in his new space, and how well all his classic abilities transfer over. From his multiple jumps to copy abilities, everything just fits, as if there's no major series-changing transition happening at all. I love how the designers created these environments for Kirby to explore, making levels that, if you're going for everything, have an appropriate length as you're discovering secrets and completing optional objectives just by interacting with interesting looking parts of the level, but if you miss one and need to replay the levels are short enough when rushed through to ensure that these revisits won't take long at all. It's a balance in level length and design I've only ever felt was so spot on before in the likes of Spyro 2, where the design and lengths of the base levels are excellent and the extra objectives complement it perfectly. While these level themes that we have here aren't horribly inventive, however, that doesn't mean they're not incredibly fun. I had a blast combing through every level in the game, making sure I got everything as I went, completing all the treasure roads as they appeared and taking time to engage in the Waddle Dee Town activities like the arena, mini-games and power upgrading. It's nuts how fun these powers feel even in their base forms, but when they start getting stronger as you go through, they're not just a treat to control, but make you feel unstoppable too, and they need to make you feel that way in the later stages of the game and post-game. I'm not gonna spoil what happens here. If you're interested, Ant Dude has a very comprehensive review from a perspective of a long-time fan of the series. But the later stages of this game get very challenging and push your prowess with your copy powers, last second dodges and pattern reading to the limit. This game has so much for you to engage with and uses the powers Kirby has, both old and new, in creative and fun ways all the way through. I don't think I can say there was a moment where I wasn't having fun. It's nuts to me how well HAL knocked this new formula for the series out of the park on their first go. And if this is now the new standard for the series going forward, then I think we're all in for a real treat. Forgotten Land made me a huge fan of Kirby, and I can't wait to see where the pink puffball goes next. But you know what's not fun? Massive train delays. On the way to the biggest UK Smash tournament of the summer, Regen, my train went precisely one stop and then got held in Hartlepool for over an hour, meaning I almost didn't make my second connecting train to get me to Birmingham. Thankfully, delays on the Sheffield line really helped there. But the whole ordeal was incredibly stressful. One positive of the whole thing, though, was getting to play the original Castlevania through fully for the first time. I'd owned the collection, all of the games on the Switch, for like a year and hadn't touched it, so I thought, hey, first time on a train in a while, might as well give them a go. And suffice to say, it was really, really enjoyable. The game's simplistic design makes it easy to pick up and play, and I thought the whip and different weapons all complemented each other nicely. It took me a bit of time to figure out I was trading off my hearts to use sub-weapons, but once I did I thought the game was a blast. I'm just a chunky man messing up creatures and beasts, and stuff like the knockback didn't bother me too much because I already knew it would be a thing. I loved the difficulty throughout the game because I knew I had the tools to overcome everything. Did I use save states though? Yes. Would I be being this positive if I hadn't used them? I don't know. But because I did use them, I had an absolute blast with this game. It was dead simplistic NES fun, but all the same, very, very fun. Do you know what the best bit is about recording audio for a video that you wanted to put out last year, and the segment you're currently reading through is like an 8-month-old piece of writing? Your opinions change, and how you structure stuff might switch as well. For instance, the last segment there about Castlevania was meant to end with me saying that Simon and Richter are really handsome boys, and then linking into the fact that Velma is a completely ravishing specimen, but hey-ho, life changes, it comes at you fast, and here we go with the Multiverses segment, brought in a completely different way. This segment was originally going to be me being like, ooh, I don't like doubles in Smashy Bros, but Multiverses turned me onto it. But actually, at time of recording, I've actually started to really enjoy playing doubles. Commentating it is still a nightmare. Watching it, I still find boring. But playing it, no, I think it's quite fun now, and I think I could probably accredit some of that to Multiverses. The fact that it's just fun and hectic to be blasting around the screen, the fact that you can swap places and teleport to your partner and buff them is fun, and I just like the idea of comboing around an enemy between two of you. It's just really fun. Doubles as a format has really warmed on me the past few months, and Multiverses is probably to blame, as I said. It's a fun little time, which unfortunately I didn't end up sinking a horrible amount of time into. As I was really getting into it and playing it more regularly, I ended up leaving the country for 3 weeks to go on 2 entirely separate holidays, so yeah, I didn't have a lot of time with this one, but the little bit I did play of it, I really did quite enjoy. I hope you can't tell that this segment was entirely off the cuff. I hope I'm just that good now. Right, enough of that, let's get back on script. Okay, right, here we go. Speaking of mindless, God of War 2 once again completely challenges my expectations of that series by being entirely far deeper than I ever thought it would be. Like I said about Doom Eternal a couple of years ago, God of War 2 is a game I'd consider to be a pretty perfect sequel. It keeps the cathartic, ever-evolving combat from the first game, mixing up your magic abilities here and there, and adding a couple of new weapons to keep things fresh, and further does this by mixing in some more of those light puzzles from the first game that I enjoyed so much. While they're still not too brain-teasing, I'd say they were incredibly satisfying to solve, and as I say, broke up the game's combat really well. The only aspect of the game I think that takes a bit of a step back is the platforming. While the game does have some of it, it's rather reduced compared to the first, this game preferring to give you sections where you scale walls and ceilings instead of hopping and bopping up little platforms in ancient architecture. What the game adds in place of that though is pure spectacle. It's like they looked at the temple section of the first game and took the grandeur it brought with it and applied it to the entire game. Whether grappling across chasms, exploring beautiful structures, or casually decimating architecture to suit your needs, the whole game just feels bigger than the first, even though from a gameplay perspective not a ton has actually been changed. The tone of the story also takes a bit of a shift, going from the more god-compliant Kratos on a quest to kill Ares to wipe away a debt, to a more visceral, angry Kratos on a quest purely for vengeance. It's the tone that the series is known for, and since this is the most popular entry, it's quite easy to see why that label sticks to the original trilogy, even if it isn't quite on the nose for the first game. One thing I really appreciate here with the boss fights, they aren't just hulking brutes with big red health bars anymore. Yeah, okay, there are still a couple of mythical monsters menacing your journey, but there's also encounters with foes more on your scale, and the lack of health bars present in both types of fight really sells the idea that Kratos doesn't see these stronger foes as bosses. They're presented the same as regular enemies with no health bars, just obstacles in Kratos' way on his quest for vengeance. If you ask me which I preferred, I don't know if I could give a mega definitive answer, as they're both pretty great and each has slight advantages over the other. I should probably revisit 3 now though that I have all of the context, and perhaps eventually I will, but more so, I'm curious to see how playing these two, in addition to previously playing 3, will shape my opinions on the soft reboots, as I do own it on PS Plus, and maybe I'll get to it sometime. I'll tell you what I didn't get to, though, in a timely fashion at least, my birthday games. So, my birthday's in June, and for it I'd received 3 games. Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which I got to pretty swiftly, a game I'm hoping to feature later on, time will tell on that one, and this game, Pokemon Legends Arceus. Yes, just 3 short months after receiving it, I actually got round to playing it, and I'm annoyed I didn't get to it sooner. From the outset, I'd heard friends and online opinions alike touting this as one of the best things to come out of the series in years. It got me curious, but not enough to get right to it at release. I knew this one operated differently to the likes of Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl, but I also wasn't itching to get back to a Pokemon game, you know? Well, let me tell you, this isn't a Pokemon game, at least not in the traditional sense. The focus shifts away from being the best, making a team and challenging gyms, to refocus on the core message of the series which it's carried since the beginning. That being, gotta catch 'em all. That sounds like a weird thing to say regarding the game and the series in general, right? But it's insane how much focus is placed on catching in this game, and how the devs ensured that catching felt incredibly rewarding and satisfying as you went. In your efforts to study and catalogue every Pokemon to aid the efforts of the region's professor to create the very first Pokedex back in feudal Japan era Sinnoh, known in this game as Hisui, the game encourages you to employ all sorts of tricks to catch the critters to complete the compendium. This includes different types of balls, using stealth to catch mons off guard, hitting them from behind to stun them to make sure catches are more effective, distracting them with food and lures to make them head to or face certain directions, and of course, as is tradition, battling them. It's nuts to me that battling, which has been at the core of the series since the start, feels like it takes such a back seat here, with the new catching mechanics being what I was always more tempted to employ than outright fighting. Battling, of course, is still here, and has some new added depth with the addition of agile and strong style moves Pokemon can use to either inflict more damage or gain additional turns after using a move. But in truth, the only battles I found myself really invested in were all the post-game bosses, which I initially wasn't going to engage with, but ended up finding to be a real treat. All of this action with the catching and battling is found within the open areas around Hisui, with the hub of Jubilife Village being how you access these areas. This is also mainly where you'll accept side quests, all of which are based around finding items and Pokemon in the different regions of Hisui, or completing a Pokedex entry or short battle in order to gain rewards. They're all based around what you're already going to be doing, so it felt natural and satisfying to complete, as well as easy to integrate within the actual game itself, without feeling like too much of a distraction. Your map and the objective markers you have will direct you effectively to where you need to go, but I found myself actually taking ages to get there, as I explored and combed through each new area, looking to see what Pokemon I could find. I've never popped off for Sudowoodo before, but this game made me do it when I first saw him. Traversing all the regions of Hisui became even easier when I gained the Ride Pokemon, who made traversing the environment a breeze and made it so I wasn't bored of any of the back and forth I experienced, where you're going back to the professor to log your Pokedex and then back to the main area to go and get more mons. The fast travel also helped this. It felt like such a breath of fresh air to be excited for a Pokemon game again, let alone for the thing it's incentivized to start with, and admittedly I never really properly engage with how far this game goes out of its way though to make itself feel fresh while familiar, and how hard it goes in making sure that catching at the core of its experience is super satisfying. I'm really hoping the main series learns a lot from this game going forward, and by the looks of Scarlet and Violet, it looks like this may be the case. For the first time in quite a while, I'd say I'm excited for a main series Pokemon game, and that's actually really refreshing. Can't say I was super excited about Overwatch 2 though. Like, for the longest time I just flat out wasn't asked about it. It was unveiled in such a cynical manner, reduced the number of tanks, and with everything surrounding Blizzard seeming so constantly dodgy, I didn't intend on giving this game a sniff when it came out. And yet, here we are. It's on this list. I hate the fact that despite everything with Blizzard, I played and enjoy it, though I did refuse to financially support the game after all their shite with unions, and the fact that Blizzard just appears to be run by cretinous lizards. I gotta have some integrity when I'm leaping into crowds as Winston and just holding the shoot button. But Junker Queen is an excellent aggro tank, which meshes quite well with my playstyle. I especially love her bleeding mechanic and the knife. She's just so cathartic to play, and inflicting so much damage just through that bleeding is really nice. Like when someone's pushing that little bit too hard or running in, I just pull them back towards me and hey, that feels great. The changes to a lot of the other tanks, as well as Mei, make them that little bit different, but still quite enjoyable to play. Mei may have lost her freeze, but this now makes her function as a flamethrower hero, which was rumoured all through the life cycle of Overwatch 1. This also makes her a bit more aggro, which I welcome because I'm a constantly aggro little gremlin. D.Va with a rebuffed defense matrix is nuts. Sigma standing out with him being one of only 2 shield tanks left makes him even more unique, and Winston actually being able to survive when being hit makes him such a fun character to play again. Things aren't perfect, obviously. Torb and Bastion just feel straight up unfun to play against, similar to Mass Res back when Mercy had that as her ultimate ability, and if you're not prioritising them, they're just gonna clean you out. The same goes for Orisa and Zarya. Dear God, what were they doing here? Double Bubble and aggro Orisa are nuts, with the latter feeling like she never dies between Fortify, an expanded health pool, a cancelable block for any and all projectiles, and her own stunning projectile which persists after everybody else in the roster lost their stuns. There's defo some work to be done, and when the first patch came out quite recently at time of writing and updating this section, a couple of these issues were addressed. Except Sojin, who is incredibly silly, but surprisingly, at the time I got into the game again, I was having a pretty good amount of fun. The game felt like a good enough sequel, which did a better job than its predecessor did by the end of its life cycle of being fun, rewarding the player, and feeling actually satisfying. Since we're on the topic of sequels though, let's discuss the final sequel of this whole list. Little Nightmares 2. When the first one was featured in the 2020 video, then I was still doing the whole Game of the Month concept. It had the Herculean task of measuring up to Crash Bandicoot 4, which was one of my most anticipated games of that year and second in my top 10 of that year. I really enjoyed it when I played through it, loved its sense of scale, atmosphere and design of the monsters and puzzles that were there, but it just didn't get its flowers, and now I'm hoping to give it with the sequel. I was really happy when this was announced actually, and despite my skepticism on the trailers as it looked to be adding combat and making the game co-op, I did eventually play the game after grabbing it in the classic Game 3 for 2 deal, which I'm hoping is becoming a staple of this channel. When I did play Little Nightmares 2, I found myself really bloody impressed. The atmosphere from the first game remains wholly intact, with every screen feeling hopeless, desolate and eerie in the best way. The sense of scale is also wonderfully preserved, and amplified as well with the new environments the game presents, using a more varied approach than the nautical setting of the Moor to both flesh out the world and deliver scenarios that wouldn't have made sense within its underwater walls. What I thought was combat and co-op being a large part of the game from the trailers, thankfully, pans out very well too. Neither of them are really present in the form I was expecting. With the combat, this means it wasn't akin to Over the Hedge on PS2, which I don't know why I thought it was going to be like that, I just did. A combat occurs in the game, but is presented as much more of a timing and movement puzzle. The weapons you use are so large compared to Mono, the player character, that he's constantly lugging it behind him, and swings it so viscerally that it takes all of his might, meaning that if you misuse your swing, you're going to pay for it. It's only present for a couple of instances throughout the game, so it never outwears its welcome too, which is nice. The co-op is also not like I thought it would be at all, in the way that it actually isn't co-op. The player is accompanied by an AI partner throughout the runtime, helping you to mainly make jumps across large gaps, but the relationship the two characters develop between one another is really nice. I was worried that this would dilute the horror setting, you know, this tiny little being alone in this big world with rancid freaks, but since you get separated at least once per level from your co-op partner, this isn't the case at all, letting the feeling of uneasiness really settle in as you navigate these rotten environments all on your lonesome. I'm being a little vague here, I do realise, but that's because going any deeper would spoil quite a bit of the game's story and set pieces, which I think are best experienced by playing it yourself. I highly recommend you do as well. It's a bit less bite-sized than the original and really drew me into this horrible world that it has, even having some nice emotional moments as well. I went out of my way to go back and 100% the game too once I was done for the first time. I'd enjoyed it that much. It's a real treat. I'm not going to go terribly in depth with this one. In fact, I'm probably not going to say much of anything at all. This game will, at some point, be getting its own video from me, where I want to go super in detail and discuss it. For now though, I think this video will give you a bit of a preview of my overall thoughts by the end. I just can't help myself, can I? FF7 was the perfect place to end things last year, and Frontiers seemed like a pretty perfect segue into my top 10 for this year, didn't it? Well, because I hadn't beaten it yet despite getting it for my birthday, I decided to plow through Ghostwire Tokyo in the dying days of the year. Immediately, I just want to say I love the atmosphere of this one, turning one of the largest, most bustling cities in the world into literal ghost town, complete with an eerie, damaging fog covering most of the city, creatures resembling humans moshing about and powering towards you when they see you, the souls of those who didn't make it through the fog being scattered all around as collectibles, and yokai being present as both a way to bag collectibles and navigate the city. It gives the game a very empty, eastern style of horror that I've actually never really experienced before. The mood is also helped by how you attack enemies. No guns or anything physical, except for a mystical bow and arrow you find a little ways in, which the game lets you use in the event that you lose the main method of attack, which can happen to you sometimes. Instead of firearms or anything like that, you're wielding 3 different types of magic: a rapid fire wind burst, a wide sweeping water sickle, and a small but explosive firebomb. Combat starts off a bit sluggish when you only have the base forms of the 3, but when you start upgrading and mixing things in like instant stun talismans, parries, and defeat multiple enemies at once by exposing their cores, it quickly gets satisfying and hectic as enemy variety also starts to increase. When you're not expelling the wretched likes of the visitors, you'll be exploring Tokyo to get to your next destination. I thought this was a really fun aspect of the game as well, using glides from higher buildings and searching every nook and cranny to collect more spirits so I could further upgrade myself was a hoot. It wasn't on the same level of fun, fluid navigation as the likes of Dying Light 2 or Deathloop, considering you're not really doing much parkour, but I did find Tokyo a much more rewarding place to explore, as it felt like my exploration was being rewarded even incrementally, through the likes of the map becoming easy to navigate, more of it opening up, and receiving spirits to help level up my character. You'll notice I haven't talked much about the story, if at all, and that's mainly because it's actually pretty simple, but it did manage to invest me quite a bit. It doesn't get horribly complex or anything, but there's some nice enough character stuff to keep me interested, to the point where I'd say you should give it a go yourself and experience it that way. The only other thing I'd say about this one is that, despite doing every side mission that popped up as the game goes on, it does tend to feel a little short once you go over the halfway mark. There's 6 chapters in the game, and by the time you finish chapter 2, which is the longest by far, you're actually on the downward slope. I didn't think at the start of the month I was going to be playing anything beyond the likes of Mario Galaxy and some PS2 stuff. As I've previously said, in December I don't tend to play much new, but Ghostwire came through and delivered a rather satisfying time to close off the new stuff that I played this year. And as if the end of this video couldn't get any more anticlimactic, there's this too. I bought this game during one of my many CEX visits of the year after getting rid of it many moons ago as a baby boy, despite getting all the way to the final level. I was big on the movie this film sort of ties into when I was younger, but but couldn't quite manage to beat the game despite restarting it numerous times. And since I'm such a silly little guy, I came back to it just before December, and like I've discussed before with other stuff on this channel, returning to this game with a fully functioning... okay, with the bigger brain, highlights that I wasn't very good at games until I hit like, I don't know, like 7 or 8 or something. This game is painfully easy. It's baby's first puzzle game, with every level consisting of get thing, bring it to correct place, fight enemies, use cookies you root around for to buy stronger attacks, save friends, next level. The game does sometimes mix it up though, with the likes of Pooh and Tigger being playable alongside the titular piglet, in stealth sections of all things. When I think of these two characters, stealth doesn't seem like their forte. Pooh will constantly alert enemies with his rumbly tumblies, so you're constantly on the run, but Tigger has the chance to at least try sneaking past the heffalumps and woozles. There's a decent variety of these two types of enemy, some having special gimmicks, but ultimately all going down to Piglet in these quick time event hallways, which has actually some tiny element of strategy, with how you position yourself prior to engaging the enemy, giving you more spaces to work with and therefore more time to get rid of them before they reach you should you start the fight from further away. The game also tries to scaffold the player quite a bit, not that they'll probably need it unless they are like, again, 4 or 3 or an embryo. With the narrator who tells you precisely how each item you find may be used and what to do next, there's little to no chance of you ever being slightly confused as to what to do next, which makes the fact that I couldn't beat this game call lots of things into question. I do find the touch of the narrator very charming though, adds a lot to the storybook atmosphere which Pooh as a series has always embodied very well. All that said, I'm not coming back to this one ever, I don't think. Not because it was bad or boring or whatever, but because I just don't think I'll ever need to. I've beaten it, and it can now join the likes of the Thai games and Scooby-Doo and the Cyber Chase as games that an older me actually came back to and managed to beat.
The shadow remains cast.
Okay, last one, I promise. Because of the fact that this video has been obviously mega delayed, we have an unprecedented, unforeseen, never before happened situation of a game I beat after Christmas making it into this video. Usually these games get excluded because the video's already done, and the likes of Jedi Fallen Order, or get pushed to the next year like with Pokemon Shield. Bayo 3 was the first game from my Christmas lot I worked my way through, and it just so happened I beat it right at the end of the year, so it qualifies for this video. If I look at games that define different parts of my life, the original Bayonetta, right alongside Donkey Kong Country Returns, Banjo-Kazooie, and probably Doritos Crash Course defined my early teens. I loved and played the original to death after discovering it through DSP of all people, and playing the demo through a few times on Xbox. I got the game for Christmas of 2011, and after I beat the game and immediately went through it again on hard, then again on Infinite Climax, I was super duper into it. The second game was a birthday gift for my 17th, and I don't have a lot of fond memories with it, actually. In fact, I don't remember pretty much anything about it aside from the escape from Inferno and a couple of bits and pieces from the final chapters. I don't even remember what the whole setup for the story even was. I remember I got chainsaws at one point, and there's a couple of enemies I'd recognise, but that's the long and short of my memories of 2. 3, let's not beat around the bush, had a reputation before its release. It disappeared for years after being announced, resurfaced, and then just before coming out had Helena Taylor spitting up all over it and Kamiya going bonkers in response. This all happened release week, and somehow it managed to resolve itself in time for people to actually feel comfortable buying the game. And after all that, after spending the majority of my downtime during the festive season shipping through it bit by bit, I bloody loved it. The original Bayonetta is one of the best, most satisfying games of all time, and while the second isn't that memorable to me, it shares a lot of that same blood, albeit with some odd alterations. 3, to me, goes a bit more towards the design of Bayo 1, but turns up the spectacle to 11 in every aspect. Settings are grander, with the different facets of the new multiverse taken across the Great Wall of China by way of volcano, annihilated seascapes, ancient tombs, and capital cities on the brink of collapse. Combat has been built upon to allow you actively use the demons relegated usually to boss finishes, making them fully playable with their own signature abilities and playstyles, as well as having them been able to chain into combos at the press of a button. End of chapter bosses are now more spectacle than ever before and involve a greater degree of playability than previous installments, at least for their finishing quicktime events. The story is of a much greater scale, featuring a multiversal level threat, and the music is insanely good as you would expect it to be from this series, and I think it stands out just as much as the original did to me 10 years ago. Over 10. All of this converges to make this the best the series has ever looked, and for me, felt to play as Bayonetta. The other characters, on the other hand, aren't quite so stunning. Jean gets the worst of it, being relegated to these weird Metroid-esque stealth segments that aren't unfun, just stick out like the sorest of thumbs compared to the rest of the game. Then there's Viola, the new character. She's goofy enough within the story to fit in with the general silliness that seems to ramp up as the game goes on, which actually might be my favourite thing about it. It just keeps getting sillier and sillier. She plays more in line with Bayo than Jean, but stands out with her own playstyle. She can't summon demons like Bayo can, except for Cheshire, who she has to give up her katana to summon, but does massive damage, leaving her to fight only with her fists and feet, while Cheshire wanders around doing big hits. Her lack of katana means that she can't block or parry enemies either, the latter of which is the only way she can access Witch Time. I get the idea of trading off her power and defense to summon Cheshire, but even when she has the katana, she feels so much less versatile than Bayo. This fits in, I guess, with the story reason, Viola's only a witch in training and not having mastered Witch Time as of yet, but the parry timing feels so weird in multi-enemy fights that it makes her a lot less fun, and I think certain Alfheims are just downright unfun as her. I also think the different styles of gameplay stand out so much to me though because of how excellent the rest of the game feels to play when you are controlling Bayo. The story invested me more than the others managed to, the gameplay of Bayo herself is exceptional, the music is top notch yet again, the level design is a step back from the likes of 2, and as the final game I beat this year, Bayonetta 3 sends it off with a bang. How the hell are we at this point already? Last year went so stupidly quick. It doesn't feel like 2 minutes ago I was making 2021's video and now I'm in the final parts of editing and scripting this one. Weird, man. This year's been an interesting one, from both a personal and professional standpoint, and one thing I've realised about myself this year is that the way I consume video games nowadays is very different to even just a couple of years ago. I found myself this year really enjoying taking games a little slower, chipping through them over the course of a couple of weeks or a month to get the full experience out of them, and I really like doing that. I've stopped pressuring myself as much to just hurtle through as many as possible for the sake of specifically this end of year video, because I found myself feeling I was just rushing everything and wanting to end things without getting the full experience, and I'm done with that, man. It's over. I'm about to get a little mushy, so if you want to skip straight to my faves, go here. Otherwise, listen up. I have a New Year's resolution to try and make content more consistently, and last year I just didn't. It's not for lack of wanting to do so, I just didn't end up doing it. I feel sort of guilty, but at the same time I'm like, my free time in the past couple months since the start of this current year has changed very drastically, so I'm trying to spend it doing the things I enjoyed before, and sometimes making content ends up taking a bit of a back seat. The video I did put out on Sonic and the Black Knight I was really proud of. I think it came out really well, but I wish I'd been able to cover more. I can't promise any more consistency this year with how my career is going to be, but we'll see. Maybe I'll keep it up. I actually have, as I say, a video recorded, scripted and edited, ready to go. I just have to actually put it together, so we'll see. We'll see when that one comes out. Anyway, here's the top 10. I was considering making it top 5 because I only played 22 games this year compared to like 30 plus in the past 2 years, but hell with that, man. I want to celebrate the ones I enjoyed the most, and if a game I talked about isn't on this list, it's not that I didn't like it. I've enjoyed everything I've played this year. I just fell in love with some games more than others. Number 10, Ghostwire Tokyo. Last minute revelations regarding this list meant that Ghostwire steals the number 10 spot away from what probably would have been Overwatch 2, which at the time of writing I've also once again stopped playing because it's entirely lost its luster. Excellent atmosphere and rewarding exploration makes this one a winner. With the deep roots of Japanese occult culture it utilises working well for both gameplay and world design. A perfect spooky treat which I think would serve wonderfully as a Halloween game for you all this year. Number 9, Deathloop. The amount of freedom to do things your way with this one after the initial loop is mad fun, letting you choose just how you want to go about breaking the loop, what skills you want to gather, weapons you want to use, and which paths around each map you want to take. The only major thing that lets it down is that it solves its toughest puzzle for you. After letting you spend the whole game planning your grand heist that'll see you murdering 8 tough enemies one after another and ultimately stealing away the catharsis that would have come from breaking the loop yourself. The destination may fall a bit flat, but the journey certainly doesn't. Number 8, Oddworld Soulstorm. After me being very skeptical about this one prior to release, I'm happy to say I found myself really enjoying the final product, with it serving to revamp this classic into something entirely original. While the great focus on combat may perturb some on the defend the Mudokons sections aren't impressing anybody, this new take on an old friend still satisfies that puzzle platforming crave we all have. Number 7, Little Nightmares 2. And hey, while we're talking about puzzle platforming, let's throw some horror in there too. Little Nightmares 2 carries on the rotten vibes of the first game and has a surprising amount of heart in its simple little story, with some stuff near the end really genuinely getting to me. I love its puzzle design and variety of locations, and I really do hope there's a third game in development, because this is quickly becoming one of my favourite little series. Number 6, God of War 1 and 2. Like Doom and Eternal a couple years ago, I couldn't bring myself to separate the two, as while I do think they have their own specific edges over the other, God of War with its platforming and simplicity, 2's presentation and puzzles, I also love them for very similar reasons. Beneath the surface of this gore-filled, rage-driven hack and slash is a story which is far more interesting than one may think, and the depth of design for both puzzles and levels, it's really clear to see why this series is now as big as it is, because the foundations are so incredibly strong. Number 5, Metroid Dread. We're in the big leagues now. Dread may be the latest in a long-running series that generally I'm not that into, but it won me over just like Fusion did with its atmosphere, gameplay, and get this, map design. Who knew that a little man like me, who doesn't like non-linearity, would place a Metroid game of all things in his top 5 for the year? Well, let me tell you, it deserves to be here. Number 4, Pokemon Legends Arceus. This completely fresh take on a series that I was growing a little weary of really does stand out to me as I played more and more of it. Refocusing the series to be more about the catching than the battling is a simple but incredible change that really does make this game feel fresh. It's rough around the edges and could be considered a bit basic, but by the time I was done with it, I'd caught loads of Pokemon and fought the true final boss. I hope that the series starts taking notes from how effective this game was, or at the very least we get another game in this style, because for the first time ever I really wanted to catch them all. Number 3, Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Who knew that transplanting gameplay from something I wasn't overly fussed with into an entirely different franchise would produce something this spectacular? This game takes Kirby into a new dimension but doesn't sacrifice any of the fun or charm as it goes. It's got an abundance of content, levels designed as perfectly as the likes of 3D greats like Spyro and Banjo, and by the end a welcome amount of challenge that feels so incredible to overcome by applying what you've learned. I wouldn't hesitate to call this one a perfect transition to 3D, and for a really long time this game was uncontestably at the number 2 spot, but that changed after I beat number 2, Bayonetta 3. In grand fashion, the final game I played this year stormed straight into the number 2 spot. While it was a very hard choice between this game and Forgotten Land, the style, spectacle and pure fun I have with this one manages to just push it into that number 2 spot. It reminded me of just why I fell in love with Bayonetta, the game, not the lady, all those years ago, and provides satisfaction while fighting that I don't think I've felt since that original game. I'm even going to try going back and platinuming every level, something I haven't considered doing since Bayo 1 when I very first played it. There's a trend with this top 5 here that I went for 100% or as close to it as I wanted to with each of them, and all of them were so satisfying to complete as fully as I could. There was, though, one more game that satisfied me more than anything else this year. Number 1, Sonic Frontiers. I told you my thoughts would be maybe a little bit clearer by the end of this video, right? And you know me, what else was going to be number 1? I don't intend on giving much else away as to why this one is placed where it is. Again, since I do want to do a fully fledged video on it at some point. What I will say though is that this game satisfied me not just as a player, but especially as a long-time Sonic fan. And it made me feel things about the series that I haven't felt in a very, very long time. And that's pretty special. And there we go, man. We're done. This year was a pretty nice one for games, with some real hits. As I said, I liked pretty much everything I played. I just loved some more than others, so they didn't quite make the cut. And next year's also looking to be pretty great. I'm looking to get through a lot of stuff in my backlog, and I've got stuff like Nier Automata, Bloodborne, the Ghostbusters remaster, Psychonauts 2, the Crisis Core remake, Klonoa remasters, God of War 2018, Metal Gear Solid 5, and a bunch of others I want to experience. I'm really excited for all the stuff I've got lined up, so let's meet back at the end of this year and have a chat about all of them, yeah?